Welcome to this edition of the Capital Brief. I'm Seth Berenzweig, coming here again from our beautiful BL Media studio in beautiful Tysons, Virginia. Back with my friend and colleague John Tamny. John, how you doing?
I'm great. Good to be back. That Todd was pointing out the cicadas are quiet.
Yes,
right now.
yes. We're in the bottom of the ninth inning.
Nice weather out too.
Yeah, beautiful weather. Almost done with the cicadas, and it's almost Miller time. So what could possibly be better? John, I wanted to talk about an interesting story that I saw in the news. I know it's something that you've written about, and it has to do with what appears to be the reemergence of supersonic travel. I remember a number of years ago when the supersonic airplanes were grounded, unfortunately, and it's been a number of years. I saw a story and an interesting article that you wrote about the other day that United Airlines is purchasing 15 supersonic planes from a company called Boom Technology. And it has raised some interesting issues. Just a few data points before I kick it over to you. The supersonic travel industry is projected to be a multi-billion-dollar industry. This technology will reduce travel time for overseas travel and any long-term travel by about 50%, which is a big change. It's a major order, and I don't know if you've seen what the plane looks like, but I will tell you that if you take a look at the picture, it is ultra cool. It's a plane that you want to be in. Let's just put it that way. Tell us about this major purchase and what this means in terms of the next chapter of travel here in the United States and abroad.
Well, it's amazing. It's thoroughly amazing in terms of what it can mean for the future. Let's never forget that humans are the driver of all progress. This is a human creation that will create more of the second biggest driver of progress, which is time. As you've alluded, this will shrink flight times. New York to London, the talk is that it will shrink to a 3.5-hour flight. To San Francisco to Tokyo, it will go from a 10-hour flight to roughly a 6-hour flight. What this could mean for business, for literally shrinking the world, has really staggering implications.
Not far off, just a couple of years, they're going to go up. It seems like they're just a few years from launching.
United's order, I think, is for 2029. And so it makes you think what's next with this. Certainly fighter jets at present can get you from Los Angeles to Seattle in a matter of minutes, is what I've heard. And so what could this mean for the future of flight if we can get what we have in fighter jets into actual planes moving people around the world safely? It's remarkable because the limits to growth are the limits of combining people, of connecting people. This could shrink the world in really remarkable ways in terms of growth.
Such a fun topic to talk about. There's literally no limit to the human imagination. And to be able to see this industry come back really shows how powerful business can become as long as it's not being interfered with by our friends here in Washington, D.C. But there's another wrinkle to the story that I read in your article, and it compares the fates of two companies. One, Boom Technology, which is an incredibly awesome, cool, sophisticated, fully venture-backed company that has an order for these 15 planes with United. And then there is a company that met a very different fate called Aerion Corporation. It was a company based in Nevada that had a very promising pipeline. Their customer list was no joke. It included Boeing, NetJets, and others. But the problem with Aerion was that it just simply ran out of money. So where Boom Technology was able to move forward to many riches, Aerion Corporation was not so fortunate, and it just simply ran out of money. The reason why I think that this is an interesting observation is that, as you have pointed out in your column, it really brings back in some interesting thought in terms of the intersection of politics and business, because there has been a lot of money that has been doled out in the airline industry. Just another handful of data points. The major airliners received through emergency relief within the last year alone over $58 billion. The amount of money that went to United, $5 billion. All companies got the so-called PPP loans, but United got $5 billion, and they've been able to stay afloat. And you've commented online that there's a lot of money floating around that's ours, that's being put into different corners. What, if any, role does the government have in terms of using its largesse and its muscle to help make decisions on what industries and what companies within certain industries should live or die?
Sadly, government has too much of a role. We see this all the time, and I think it's economically very negative. If you are bailing out one corporation, you're bailing in another. There's maybe a different debate with this in that suddenly Washington and state capitals around the country decided that they had the power to basically shut down activity, human action altogether. So was United somehow owed, again, a different debate? But more broadly, yes, what role does government have? Hopefully it's a small role, because let's never forget, economic growth is a consequence of bad ideas being allowed to die quickly. If you go 100 years ago, Detroit was the Silicon Valley of its time. Over 2,000 car makers were created. We think of the big three today, but realistically just about every car maker created died. Did that make Detroit poor? No, that was the source of its dynamism. We put bad ideas out to pasture, let the assets, human and physical, be released to better, more capable hands on the way to better outcomes down the line. We see this today in Silicon Valley, the most ferociously capitalist place on earth. There are no bailouts in Silicon Valley, and that's the source of its wealth. And so with government, once they are in the business of playing a role in business altogether, they have a tendency, because they focus on saving jobs, of wanting to save everything. We saw that tragically in the past year. So let's hope that what happened in the past year isn't indicative of what will be in the future.
Well, the companies in Silicon Valley got a little bit of a boost in the arm. They certainly haven't gotten the boost in the arm that the airlines got. Facebook and Yahoo didn't get $5 billion. They didn't get that. So I agree with that. They did get emergency paycheck protection program relief, where they did get a few $1 million, although you could argue that was really more to protect the people than to protect the companies so that people wouldn't starve. Regardless of whether you're in Silicon Valley or whether or you run an airline, the government literally told people, don't go to work and stay home and don't travel. So they didn't do anything wrong. Mm-hmm. I've never been a big fan of United. I don't fly United. I make a point of avoiding United. But
you're not alone.
They didn't do anything wrong either. It wasn't their fault that people weren't allowed to fly. Does government have a place in an emergency to be able to support the life-sustaining measures to allow companies to be able to survive and thrive? It's true that you take a look at companies like Boom and United, and they're going to be living large. A company like Aerion, as you've correctly noted, is going to go to the wayside. How do you draw the line in a public crisis between who is entitled or who is warranting to get some kind of relief to survive versus just throwing them off to the curb and letting them just figure it out on their own?
Well, it's a great question, and it's not to pump the book, but it's one I wrote about a lot in When Politicians Panic, because as you've pointed out, a lot of businesses got PPP money this time around. And government, quite simply, cannot be the investor in this. I think this was a disastrous thing, because let's never forget that we are the richest country in the world precisely because businesses regularly die in the United States on an annual basis. And so some will say, well, no, but see, government only went to save the healthy businesses. Now think about that. Think about if there had been lockdowns in 1999, 1998, 2000. Okay, in that case, Amazon's probably not saved because it was just bleeding money.
Mm-hmm.
Apple nearly died around that time. No one wanted to touch Apple. So do you save Apple? Oh, let's see, Netflix. Netflix was desperately searching for a buyer in the form of Blockbuster, which was big at the time, and Blockbuster said, "Are you kidding?" So again, what do you save? You save the healthy ones. Well, today's healthy ones are in very many instances not tomorrow's. That was Michael Milken's brilliant vision long ago, as he said, "I'm going to fund the businesses that will replace the blue chips." That's where I see the dynamism coming. But you don't know.
Junk bond king, right?
Junk bond. Not really junk. It was just high yield.
Right.
Businesses that didn't rate bank attention, Milken made a fortune off of funding and finding investment for. And so what is that? If you look at what was healthy back in, say, 98, 2000, well, you'd save AOL, you'd save Yahoo, you'd save a lot of those that you wouldn't, that a few years later you said, "Are you kidding me?" And so government can't play the investor because government invariably wants to save the booming, healthy ones. Well, that rarely reflects the future in the world we live in.
So you're raising a point that is an interesting related point that doesn't get much attention. The point that you're raising is that the private capital markets are generally pretty smart, and they know where to put the smart money. Now, sometimes they get it right and sometimes they get it wrong, but that's their freedom of choice. They have the right to make and place big bets on the table. So if you have a high-yielding bond, the reason it's high-yielding is because it's higher risk, right? Today, private money is sitting on the sidelines looking for good deals. Approximately $3 trillion worth of PE money is sitting on the sidelines looking to invest in new businesses. That money can go to work. You talked about the notion of the government saying, we want to go ahead and help prop up healthy businesses. There could be an argument made before the coronavirus 19 notion wasn't even in existence yet, that the airlines were actually having a pretty tough time. I mean, just like any business, you had some airlines that had better balance sheets than others. But, frankly, there was an interesting issue about which airlines deserved to survive. And really, maybe when the government came in, they prolonged the life of an airline that normal market forces would have otherwise done the dynamic that you would have said. Now, of course, that would have been awfully unfair because they didn't do anything wrong. It wasn't their fault that people were ordered that they weren't allowed to fly. But isn't private equity money really the smarter play? And isn't that so much more efficient because then it's not Washington just simply taking money from our tax dollars and just redirecting it elsewhere?
Oh yeah, any kind of private money is the better play, and it would be so interesting to see what private equity could and would do with airlines, because as you allude, they've perpetually been in trouble. I forget the quote, but getting in the airline business, someone said something along the lines of it's ripping up money. It's lost quite a bit more money than it's made over time. I would point out that the airline industry in the U.S. was a creation of government. It began as a way for the Postal Service to move packages around, to move mail around. And so it's got origins in this highly regulated sclerotic thing, and I think we see it to this day. And so it'd be so interesting to see what private equity, what is that? It's just a way of saying we are looking for poorly run businesses that we can vastly improve. What could airlines become if they got out of bed with government and were solely on their own, kind of Silicon Valley style? My guess is we're going to see that in the future, because as we've discussed on here before, private flight is soon enough going to become a very common thing. And when it is, we're going to see a lot of that
private flight in what respect?
Private jets.
Okay.
Private flight is going to be
like the NetJets
NetJets is eventually going to be something that the common man has access to. Not NetJets itself, but give it 10 years, 20 at max, we will be looking at private flight in the way we look at just getting on an airplane today.
Why do you say that? What leads you to say that?
Because what the rich enjoy is always and everywhere a preview of what we'll all enjoy. It used to be that cars were rarer than millionaires, and then cars became a common thing. So entrepreneurs have an incentive. That's why they get rich, to mass produce what is exceedingly rare. And so it's screamingly apparent that private flight will soon enough be something where I say to you, I flew private to Houston last week, and you would privately snicker, I've done that a million times. What an
Right.
idiot. Why is he telling me that? And so that is, I believe, where we're heading. So it's I get the feeling we're going to get the dynamism we want in the airline industry, probably not from the legacy carriers, but it's going to happen.
Well, and then that would further the argument to tell the government to just let the private marketplace do its thing, right? And you already see the guiding hand of the private commercial sector working in absence of, and even in times. As a productive partner with the government. I mean, if you're talking about private travel, let's not forget that within our lifetimes, within a couple of weeks, a guy by the name of Jeff Bezos is going to be put in a rocket and launched into outer space. Used to think that might just happen because his ex-wife wanted him to do that, but now it turns out he actually is going to do it voluntarily. I think he's doing it with his brother, actually. Mm-hmm. And I think they might only be in space for less than 15 minutes. But as you say, the frontier for the rich is tomorrow's market for anybody. And you're talking about private travel and all these modes of technology. I think it's really exciting to talk about these things because we're talking about technologies that are going to be available widely within the next 10 years. Supersonic travel is coming back. These are orders for planes that are in production, that work, and that are going to be carrying us within 10 years. And that's a really big deal. It's going to make business move faster, more efficiently. It's going to democratize travel, and hopefully the government will stay out of its way. So as we look ahead and we see all of these things happening literally at all different kinds of altitudes, and I know that you've touched on it a little bit, in conclusion, where do you see this going within the next 5 to 10 years? Do you see supersonic travel making a big comeback? And more broadly, what impact is that going to have? Is there going to be a secondary impact on that in terms of the broader business market?
Well, it's a good question. My guess is just because what I presume is the future is rarely the future, because entrepreneurs are constantly reshaping it. They're doing something that we at first glance think, oh, that's ridiculous, and then it turns out to be the norm. And so that's kind of what I think is so unfortunate about this. You talk about government staying out of the way, and I agree. Get out of the way of the airlines, get out of the way of the innovators in the supersonic space. But government can get in and out of the way in different ways. And one of the things that I stress in this, in regard to boom technology and Ariane, is that Ariane died. It couldn't find extra investors.
Right.
Guess who never runs out of money? Because it's backed by the most productive people on earth, the U.S. Treasury.
Right.
And so get out of the way for me would be something that's never going to happen. If the spending footprint of government were to shrink, let's ask two things. First of all, I'm guessing we'd already be at supersonic, and we probably would have passed that by now. But where will we go? Experimentation's incredibly expensive. As you allude, Jeff Bezos is about to go into space for 15 minutes in a week or two. That took a lot of money to get there. Where would we be in private space travel if the federal government hadn't been consuming trillions of dollars for years and years and years? And this year, it's hard to
running it exclusively for decades and decades, right?
Yes, yeah. That is what's not spent doesn't go under a mattress or go under a house.
Right.
It flows into the private economy. What are all the great businesses? Where's the unseen? What are all the great businesses and that died? The experiments that never happened because government was so large. And so Ariane and boom, this is exciting stuff. But what's tragic is the museum of the unseen. What did we not achieve during this time, and what will we not achieve down the line?
Such a great point. I hope that the American culture of this hate fest on billionaires is something that just stays off in a corner and makes its own irrelevant noise, because we have seen that when we have a meaningful public-private partnership with the government just keeping its mouth shut and staying for the most part out of the way, you see with Blue Origin and with SpaceX and with others, there's some amazing things that are coming down the pike, in addition to and aside from supersonic travel. And it's going to be a challenge for the feds to just regulate with a light touch. Look, we're going to need the FAA to have light light touch regulation, because we saw what happened with the 787 MAX. There's going to be a debate about whether that got held up too long. Obviously, there needs to be some safety oversight in terms of some minimal regulation, because you can't have people flying around the world in a completely unregulated industry. But the question is, can the government find some kind of a reasonable balance where they can allow the private sector to come in and innovate in the way that you're talking about? And I just think it's really exciting. This is, again, one of those topics that I learned about mainly because I was getting ready. First of all, I read your articles, which makes me smarter, but it makes me aware of these transactions. 15 supersonic planes that have just been purchased by United. Who knew? Anyway, another great topic. John, have a great weekend. Look forward to seeing you again soon.